Welcome to Southwest Magazine. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon, and my guest today is artist, writer, and St. Stephen resident Brandon Hicks. Brandon has had his work featured in National Lampoon, the CBC, the Manatee, and the American Bystander. He is featured regularly in the Maritime Edit. His latest book, On the Border, features the difference between urban and rural life during COVID-19. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Hi, Nathalie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Let's start with how you found your passion for this type of work. Let's start there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I was a kid, I spent most of my summers in Miramichi, and we didn't have a TV there. It was our summer home, and it was a big thing for my mother. It's like, we're not going to have TV, we're not going to have video games. So what we had instead were books, lots of books. And when I was a kid, you know, what really drew me was a lot of Archie comics and Mad magazine. So I kind of grew up like idolizing those things. So those are the kind of comics and artworks that kind of became my world. So, you know, with not much else to do, I would start copying them and became monofocus. I mean, that's what I wanted to do when I grew up, is tell stories in that way. So, so that I did. When I went to university, I got a scholarship for journalism, so I started to pursue that. But at the same time, I started to do comics for the school paper, which you and I went to school together, you might remember that. And then after that, that was around, you know, the early 2010s. So even then, school papers were starting to go away a little bit. So they cut a few pages, and then I started to reach out to more magazines and found that there was more opportunities. So I began to pursue those and started working for The Rumpus, which was a San Francisco-based magazine. I became an editor there. And then once I graduated, I worked as a journalist primarily, and on the side I'd do comics. But then once COVID hit, I really started to take it more seriously and focus specifically on my art.
And I mean, at what point did you discover, oh, I have a talent for drawing?
Oh gosh, it's an ongoing process. It's kind of hard to get the confidence. I always, when I was younger, I was never the best artist in class. I'd always doodle a lot, and I used to treat the page more like a playground. Like I would, you know, tell stories on one page and make a mess of it, and it wasn't really for anybody else. So I didn't feel I needed the talent. I didn't think it was even going to happen for me. It's just something that I really wanted to pursue. So I think that really, at first, drove me to focus more on writing, and I think that's kind of why I started to focus on journalism as well. I wanted to write well because I thought that was more important to good comics that I liked, is something that was clear, coherent, and the drawing would kind of come together. But, you know, so I took no formal classes. I just kept at it. It wasn't until, again, COVID, I think, when I really started to focus on my drawing as well as my writing, that I've begun to think of myself more as an artist as well. It was more just like, I'm a writer who also draws, and now I think I'm you know, an artist and a writer, which term I tend to use is cartoonist. So,
what is that creative process like? How do you start with an idea, a concept maybe, and then refine it to something very specific?
Well, it changes. I mean, because I started focusing on myself more as a writer, and I didn't think I was all that great at one particular thing. I tried a lot of different mediums. So I did a lot of theater in university. I did, again, comics. I'd write articles. I'd done some short films and stuff as well as animation. So I think it's funny, with my lack of confidence, it made me get even more confidence to try a lot of different things. And through that, I kind of developed my own process over time. So like, it depends on the project that I'm doing, but for something like this, these comics that I'm working on in my sketchbook or more of a journal situation, I'll go out and I'll experience something, and then I write down as quickly as I can. I try to get all the facts as directly and as simply as possible, and then again, I try and give myself a 3-hour deadline to draw the comic. So the drawings are a lot looser, they're a lot more free, and generally I find that I like them more than the work that I belabor, the ones that I focus too much on. So again, I like to jump from project to project and try different styles. Because there are other projects where, you know, if it's an illustration job, if I'm working for somebody and they give me, you know, an idea of what they want, I will, you know, work with them on the concept. We'll do a complicated sketch, spend weeks kind of figuring that out and then inking it. But again, when it's just doing stuff for myself, I think the quicker, the more I enjoy it, and the more I find myself in it. So.
And how do you draw? Like, do you use pen and paper? Are you using technology? How are you drawing?
I draw primarily on my iPad now. It's made it a lot quicker, and you can do more professional-looking work on a short deadline. It's also easier to send it around and make edits and changes. But I also resisted it for a long time because the comics I grew up were all done pen and ink on paper, and I thought that's kind of how you had to do it. I think that was a big block for me for the longest time, is what you're supposed to do versus what feels right to you. So for years and years, I would buy the pens I'm supposed to buy. I bought the light board, and I try things, and I think I did learn by doing that process, but it was a long way to go before I was just like, I got a project where it's like, you have to color it more professionally. So like, I got to bite the bullet and try using the iPad. And I did, and ever since then, it's allowed me to, quadruple my output and do things like live draws and stuff as well. So I've gone to a few concerts. I've been able to plug into an HDMI and just like draw as someone plays music. Or James Mullinger played at Kingsbury here a couple of years ago, and I drew that. So I think the iPad has really allowed me to kind of expand my practice a bit as well.
Well, you mentioned there's a bit of discomfort that comes from learning something new. Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenges that you've been facing as an artist?
Well, a big part of it is finding avenues with which you can try new work, because there are fewer opportunities than there used to be for artists, but they do exist, and I think you kind of have to adopt this ethos of like, fail in public. And I think that I've done that several times. But through that, you learn and you get better. Kind of like I was saying before, when I started doing comics for this university paper, which is the first thing I ever really did, they weren't very good. But I wanted to do it, I wanted to try it, and I didn't mind failing every week in the paper. I was like, I had to have something for them every Wednesday for 3 years. And, through that process, you're going to make some mistakes. You're not going to draw. You might have a comic that doesn't connect with people, but you learn. So I think as an artist, you really got to be comfortable with that failing in public.
Let's talk about the challenge of finding work in this area, or in general in New Brunswick. Mm-hmm. What have you found about that part?
Yeah, well, I mean, it does exist. I think that people there's an audience for it, clearly. But it's hard to find the way to monetize it these days, especially because of the internet, like everyone expects free, and they kind of resent having to pay for it, which, I understand. I'm of that audience too. So when I first graduated trying to pursue journalism, I worked for a couple of local magazines. I worked for some online publications as well. And unfortunately, none of them exist anymore. However, new things come up all the time. I do a back page comic for every issue of the Maritime Edit, for example, and that's been running strong for several years now. Any kind of community activity or workshop I can do with kids at libraries and stuff. Foglet Festival just happened here, so I helped launch a book here. So when I try to do things locally, they do exist, but as an artist and someone who works freelance, I've really had to expand out, particularly during COVID. I could email as well as anybody in the States. So if a job arrived in New York, I could just work remotely, and that gave me more opportunities to try other things. So I'm working for people everywhere, but I would like to focus more on local if I could. So I'm hoping that the audience exists and that the infrastructure can be created for people to explore their art and sell their art, and just connect with an audience in that way.
Why St. Stephen, I guess? How did you arrive here, and why St. Stephen?
Well, it wasn't exactly intentional. It was my partner Rebecca is an occupational therapist, and she got a job here. And since I work remotely, I followed her up. We were from St. John previously, which is hardly New York, but it's still a city. And so it was a bit of a culture shock for us to come here, especially during the early days of COVID, to how quiet it was. And I immediately took to it. Like for me, I liked that we were suddenly away from the brick and mortar. We were in nature more. I could go for a walk every day, and people were nice. Like you'd walk by, people would say hi. Immediately I started to connect with neighbors in a way that I didn't in St. John. So I just enjoyed it. I think it felt right. So we've been here about 3 years now. And since I began to notice the differences between here and where we lived previously, I started to keep a bit of an illustrated diary of it and just posting it to my Instagram, which for me really helped me engage with the community a little bit more because I started to pay attention. I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. I can write that down. And once you start to do that, like the city opens up. Once you start looking, you'll notice that there are things there. And
that diary has now been made into a book. It's called On the Border. Let's talk about this.
Please.
It's wonderful. I mean, I'm looking at it even just, quickly, and I'm noticing things that I recognize. I told you I recognized a realtor sign. There is even St. Andrews is featured in here, honey beans.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about how you arrived at this book.
Yeah, like I said, I just kind of kept this journal just for myself on Instagram. Again, I wanted to make it public. I wanted to put things out there and show what St. Stephen and St. Andrews, Charlotte County in general, like what this area is like. And as I began to do that regularly, I kind of found it was a favorite thing that I was doing. I had other projects, but it just felt the most true to my hand. It was honest, it was the most direct. And it was fun for me to go back and look at my memories. So I was talking to my editor at Conundrum, which is based in Nova Scotia, and we were talking about some different ideas for a book. And they mentioned, they're like, well, what about these, online comics? Could this be, put together in some way? And I'm like, it didn't even occur to me really, because that was not the goal of the project. I said, yeah. So we took together, we kind of found a theme of On the Border and this area, and I found some of my favorite strips over the past 2 years by that point that kind of fit that theme, and we made this book. And so it came out in September. We launched it in St. John, and the support has been really great, and people seem to really enjoy seeing themselves. And for me, it's just lovely to have my memories of this time collected in some way.
And that time was during COVID-19.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that process. Sort of what were you noticing? Are there comics that you find are your favorites or your least favorites?
Yeah, well, if they were my least favorite, they probably didn't make it in the book. there are quite a few that, it's like, because again, the nature of just trying to find, it is day to day, so if something happened to me that day, I'd probably draw the comic that day. But over time, there's several that I really felt did tell that story of moving here and what that change was like for us. So I've opened the book with kind of a bit of an introduction to St. Stephen. So the first few comics I wrote about here. So I noticed that like when you walk by some people, they have different ways of waving to you. Like there's there's the side wave, and it kind of indicated people's personalities. So I try to draw a chart to say like, what does a wave mean? But I also pointed out several locations that that mean something to St. Stephen, and I just kind of build the town around that. So I was pretty proud of that intro, and I think it gives you a sense of how the story goes, of how the book works overall. And then, yeah, it gave me an opportunity to come to St. Andrews as well, expand out from St. Stephen. We had just a book comic in here that I'm pretty proud of. We went to honeybees and we were bullied by a bird. So we're just writing a comic about that. Again, they're all, mostly my goal is to be kind of humorous, but also always sort of factual. So trying to think it's almost like telling a friend a funny story. Like we moved here, this is what's interesting about it.
And COVID-19 was a lonely period for a lot of people. I wonder if there was a personal part of this process that was healing for you through that journey.
Absolutely. I mean, just the move from St. John to St. Stephen itself is shrinking, our scope of people. When we got here, like everyone was very distant. We moved to a new community. We didn't have the chance to really go out and do a whole lot of outreach, but because of this, I found a way to engage with the town a little bit more, and also connect with people online. Here's what I am doing, which I think a lot of people were doing that, like daily diaries, I don't think that process itself was as unique. I think people were finding a way to connect online, and this was just the way that I did it. So it's interesting to look back, and I don't see a whole lot of COVID in the book. I mean, occasionally you'll see me wearing a mask or something. But for me, it was like there was more to those 4 years. Like, it feels a lot. I think now, I think a lot of us feel that like that whole time just kind of eaten up and gone. Like, but a lot happened. Like, that time still existed, and I think I want to have some positive memories of that. And moving here was a positive change for me, and I think that's kind of what was reflected in this book. It's like if I look back in myself to the years 2020 to 2022, 2023, it's like, yeah, it was rough politically and it was rough, with COVID. But I look at this book and I'm like, oh no, I actually had a good time. There was people that I met that I really enjoyed, and things that I learned and things that I did, and art that I made that I was really proud of. So I think that's what I'm very happy to have collected in this book.
And I guess, was that intentional to not present COVID in a very forward way?
Yeah, I mean, COVID was messy. I mean, politics, it became political, and that got messy, and it was just an ugly. Everyone has opinion on these things, and for me, that's just not the argument I wanted to. That's not how I wanted to remember at the time, because a lot of time that kind of goes away. You kind of lose the memory of how immediate that all felt, and the stress of it, and the. So it's not kind of a. It's not trying to ignore that. It's just there was more than that, and I think that hopefully we can kind of minimize the tension of that and kind of relax and remember, that we could still connect with each other despite everything that was going on.
Did you find any challenges in the process of making this book?
In making this book, actually, no. I've made a few books by now, and they've all been, labor intensive to some degree. It's either I'm trying to do, we did a book with the Manatee. Shauna Chase and I wrote a book called That's Not True, which was about media literacy, and it was also a book celebrating the province and tourism here. It was actually funded by New Brunswick Tourism. And that was more of a labor-intensive process where it's like, okay, we want to make sure we represent the province correctly. We want to make sure that we're saying the right things about the media and honesty. And then the drawing itself was another several-month process. But with these comics, it was really like day to day. Something happens, and I just feel like it's like, oh, I want to tell somebody this. And partially because it was COVID, and there wasn't a whole lot of ways to go and tell someone face to face, I would write them down and I would draw them. And I didn't think too much about how the drawing would turn out. I just kind of went for it. And consequently, again, I think that they soon became the easiest thing for me to do, and it ended up being some of the product that I'm most proud of doing. So of all the work that I've done, this has been the easiest, but I also think it might be my best.
Right. Is there anything that you think people might misunderstand about comics or need to understand about comics?
Well, I think it's a medium rather than a genre, if that makes sense. I know a lot of people talk to someone and it's like, oh, you draw comics. Like, I love, Batman. It's like, cool, but it's not what I do. Superheroes are great. It's one facet of what it can be. For me, it's another form of writing. So I draw just as much or even more inspiration from like picture books like Dr. Seuss or Eric Carle, Maurice Sendak than I do from like a Batman, Spider-Man, and I do like that stuff as well, but like it's a broad medium. There's a lot of things you can do with it. It's words and it's pictures. And you can kind of combine those in any different way. And for me, a big part of the fun is finding different ways that they can mix. So I think I've heard people say like, oh, I just don't like graphic novels. I don't like the content. It's like, they can be anything. It's a book. It could be something. I'm working on a book right now that has no words at all. It's a wordless novel. It's almost like a silent film in pictures, right? And I also recently did a novel last year that was mostly written with a couple illustrations. So I like to work on that balance. And to me, it's all kind of the same. I know like eventually you break the mold of what is considered a comic, but for me, as long as it's words, as long as it's pictures, that is the medium. So I think that's kind of what people could approach it. It could be what you're interested in. Just pursue it.
Do you find that people relate to these comics more because they maybe see themselves or they recognize a name or a scene perhaps that is local to them.
Yeah, well, I mean, before I started doing these comics too, most of what I did was just kind of out of my head, which, I'm a little strange. I'm idiosyncratic. I have my own sense of humor and sensibilities. But when I'm doing this, like, I try and inject my humor, but the facts are real or honest. It's what I experienced. So people see that and they connect with it a little bit more, and they start to understand my sensibilities a little bit more. I find I get more connection through this art than most they do. And now in the community, people know me a little bit better. So if I'm talking to somebody and something strange happens, or if I'm asking them a lot of questions, they're like, you're going to do a comic about this, aren't you? Yeah, maybe. Which I like. I like that people know that, and they like to see themselves reflected in the artwork. My neighbor, one day in the comic here, I walked by and he was skinning a deer in his garage, which is something you don't see in St. John. So then I went and kind of struck up a conversation with him, and then I became good friends. And then he actually took me bear hunting, which was a kind of a scary experience, but not something I generally do. But it was something he was passionate about, and I'm attracted to that passion. And then because of that, I made a little short animated film about it. And they're happy to see it. They're excited, and I'm excited to share their passion with it. So that's kind of something that I'm hoping to do more of. It's easier for me to make those connections because I'm so passionate about what I do. Finding people who love what they do and are passionate. And I was surprised coming to St. Stephen. There are so many people who have such unique passions that they're eager to share, and it's nice to kind of share that with them through some way of my own, some way to collaborate.
Well, so I guess that begs the question, what have you learned about St. Stephen and the people who live in it? For a small town, it's very big. There's a lot of different facets of the community. There's people who, you get a perception that it's more rural, everyone's a certain way, but you can find anything in this community if you look for it. So I try and search for that. Something we're going to try and do. I saw there's free curling lessons, something I've never tried before. I'm not all that sporty, but we're going to try it. And I bet you when we get there, it'll be a unique group of people who share this one passion. If they're hunting, if they're sports. Something I've also seen, especially now we're in an election year, is politicians. They believe strongly about the community. So I think if there's one thing I'd say about Charlotte County is it's not a monolith. There's a lot of different kind of peoples here. Moving from a city to a small town, I've learned that I pay attention more and I've seen more variety day to day than I had in a city where it kind of became blind to it just because it's happening all around you all the time. It's easier to focus in on the people here. What's next for you?
Well, I continue to try a little bit of everything. I'm working on a new short film at the moment, and I got a Arts and B grant to complete this wordless novel I was talking about. I'm going to continue doing these journal comics. I try to do 2 a week if I can. I'm not on any consistent schedule for that, but I also work freelance. Anybody in the community who wants to collaborate on theater, film, I want to continue to get out there and try different things. So for me, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what the goal is. I just as long as I get to draw, write, or artistically, creatively connect with people, then I'll be happy. So I'm hoping to just continue trying that.
Where can people purchase a copy of On the Border?
Yes, you can get it on the Conundrum website. It's also available on Amazon. It's going to be in a few Indigo locations across the country and in comic book stores primarily.
Okay. Thank you for being with us, and I look forward to your next project.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nathalie.
My guest today was artist and writer Brandon Hicks. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon, and thanks for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.